Yes, welcome. This is F a Rap Critic. I'm your boy Malik 16. And no, I ain't wearing a suit, but it ain't because we ain't trying to be presidents. And when you think about this month started, it's probably something that's needed. But it's because I'm trying to sell merch. I'm trying to rep my own brand here. This is trying to get y'all to get this I Used to Love Her t-shirt, which you can go cop on the raproller.com. And if there's enough demand for it down the line, I may start a store here on the YouTube channel. But for now, just feeling out the feels and seeing where the motion is. And if you haven't already, speaking of which, take a moment to like and subscribe to this very channel here. And if you didn't catch that quote or the thumbnail that you clicked on, then you know that the album that we're going over today is another one that is up for debate on its classic status. But I'll throw this disclaimer in here for my longtime viewers and people who have gone back and looked at old episodes. You recognize I did not really get an official birthday episode in this year. So this is my heads up. For the rest of this year, I'm more than likely going to be covering albums that I personally consider to be classics and leaving it up for y'all to decide, right? So every year I reserve at least one or two albums for my own bias portfolio to throw out there and cover. And this album is one of those. And so with no further ado, we'll get into it. The 25-year-old classic, The Block is Hot by Lil Wayne. This is category 1, where we go over the album, the product itself. A little background on this album. This album was released on November 2nd, 1999 under newly minted Cash Money Records under their groundbreaking, much discussed $30 million distribution deal with Universal. This is the 4th or 5th major release under that rollout. And it is the debut solo album by Lil Wayne. Not his first album, because he had by then appeared on the Bee Gees album, where it was him and BG as a duo, a young child duo. And then, of course, under the Hot Boys, which was one of those major releases since the new deal. So the first dimension we talk about in category 1 is dimension 1, the quality of the production. All right, shout out to CJ from Culturalist Theory. When I had him on here for the 8 Ball and MJG episode, he had mentioned certain producers being able to helm full albums and do it successfully. And he mentioned Manny Fresh, and I made a face when he said that because I had started reviewing 400 Degrees by Juvenile last year, and it just never made the cut. Maybe one day I'll release that through the archives, or if I start a Patreon or something. But when I was listening to that, I realized Manny Fresh in the 90s was pretty limited with the way these Cash Money record albums were being shelled out. And it's not because of talent. It's because the formula that was being followed is a very late 90s formula of more is more instead of less is more. And so on this album, you just get so many songs that you don't get to appreciate Manny Fresh's production as you would have if it was a shorter offering. Also, when you hear Manny talk about production in hindsight, he was formulaic. He's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that becomes evident when you hear him just sticking to the script, what you expect from Cash Money, with some experimental pockets here and there. And so the sounds you're expected to hear on here are the 808s, the rolling drum, those laser pew pew sounds that everybody associated with that 1999 Cash Money era. And then horns, New Orleans horns, big go-to Manny Fresh sounds. Now, the tracks on here where it sounds like Manny Fresh was able to run a little bit more free are where he deviates from that. And so you get tracks like High Beam and Young Player where he dabbles into more funk, R&B type of territory. There's still horns, but he's using a wah-wah guitar to kind of harken to this idea that it's this pimp talk song. And on High Beam, he takes more of R&B instrumentation with some of those fuller piano chords and things like that. Similar deviations is the Latin-inspired beat on Respect Us, which winds up being a single here. And as I listen to it, even the drums, there's congas being used in there. There's unorthodox stuff that he's blending in with the 808s. And that song plays out for a long time before it fades and ends. It's like, oh, Manny really wanted you to hear him. He was going off. But I'm like, do I believe that Manny was really there playing those notes, or was this kind of like a pre-programmed melody in the keyboard that he embellished and filled out with his other elements? It's like he's really showing out. It's really some salsa conga stuff. Then you get more stripped down, subdued beats, the slower joints that are meant to evoke some kind of mood, and they succeed in doing so. So a song like Lights Off, which is my personal favorite track on the album, there's this creeping version of everything he does on the up-tempo tracks, but really bare bones and just allowed to do what it does. Yeah, this guitar playing this subtle melody while the keys accent it, and it feels so southern, more than all the New Orleans bounce influence hip hop that's on this album, or just the same way, right? It's like the other side of the coin. It feels just as southern without having to pronounce itself like that. It's rooted in its countryness, right? But it's soulful and it's simple, and you get that same feel on Up to Me, where he's going to these warp notes that sound almost like a hip hop interpretation of At Your Best, the Aaliyah version, not the Isleys, except for the notes are kind of going up and down, in and out. And then F the World, where it's more this dramatic keyboard ballad kind of feel. It reminds me of Master P, I Miss My Homies, that same kind of feel where they were going for this rap ballad. So it has a cheesy kind of piano feel, but the mood is still evident because of all the other elements. So the main guitar, the hi-hats sound a little flat, but that bass line gives it the soul to match what Wayne is trying to set with the content. Hi-hats are going to be a key element all over this album. There's not a beat on here without hi-hats, so you can forget that, right? But those songs help round the album out, which otherwise would have got lost in sounding like just another product out the Cash Money factory. And so you need those moments of Manny Fresh feeling himself and feeling like, hey, let's try this. And so the track Not Like Me, it's funny that Wayne has a song called Not Like Me, right? Is another big deviation because it sounds like a West Coast G-Funk kind of beat. And I say G-Funk because it fits right in that lane, because it has a groove to it. It is R&B-ish. It is cruising worthy. It sounds like something that would have been on Tupac's Me Against the World album or Warren G's Regulate album. The downside to that is that it sounds a little dated, especially when you add some of the reggae-inspired flavor to it. But it winds up, as you listen to this album in sequence, feeling like a breath of fresh air because it stands out from all the other tracks while still kind of going in the mix. The most standout beat on here, the most experimental to me, is the very last song, You Want War. Even when I heard this when the album dropped, I was like, what is this? What a way to end the album. This doesn't sound like anything else on here, right? And so online, if you look on YouTube, you'll see in the comments for people who remember this song that it is very, very much the same way Up to Me sounds like, I said, an interpretation or interpolation of At Your Best. This sounds like Manny Fresh's interpretation of Just Another Part of Me off the Bad album, but the woos in the background, I've heard it unofficially confirmed that is sampled from the Michael Jackson Moonwalker video game, which, if anybody remembers, that is the signature sound of that game when Michael throws his hat to vanquish his enemies. And it's, you know, it's easy to get away with because it's from a video game. It's not, I don't know, the ways you can go around it. If not, then he found a very similar sound because that's the effect he was going for. The whole beat has a Michael Jackson feel to it. It is unexpected. It's high energy. It allows Wayne to end the album and make you feel like there's more that he's capable of. And Manny Fresh, there's more he's capable of. Speaking of sound effects, you think about a track like The Block Is Hot and you're hearing other video game sounds. It sounds like when your main character loses a life in the background, you're oh, oh, and then he's chopping that sound of oh in the background. It is really Manny Fresh having fun. There's some WTF moments. I think Remember Me sounds, I think that's Cash Money's version of a hard, boom bap song, but it just feels a little empty. As opposed to Come On. Another video game sound and beat. It sounds like pieces of Mega Man that Manny put through the MPC, and it still manages to have this continuous knock. So not boom bap, because it's like this, right? While the notes are going, bam, 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 bam. They're not afraid to use big horn blares all throughout this album. But as you can see, Manny's not afraid to use different sounds and pair them with his go-to pew-pew sounds and hi-hats. And that freedom is all over there. The block is hot. I've heard Just Blaze do this, where Manny will slip in elements of other beats he's made to have like a familiar nod to it. So on The Block is Hot, you'll hear him play the melody from Set It Off in the background, where it goes doo, 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 in the middle of all of those loud drum claps and stuff. And you really have to be paying attention to hear it, or you just have to be familiar with the groove. I think people from Louisiana instantly recognize two major lifetimes. One as the original joint that made Cash Money famous, the UNLV joint, and then later as Juvie bringing it back to life. And then Manny's a DJ, so there's scratches in the background too, so many elements. Again, I think the only thing that takes away from it is that there's so many songs, which we'll talk about in the next dimension. But for now, these are all things for you to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 2, the cohesion of the sonic bed, the cohesiveness of this album. How is it put together? So this is a question of sequence. 17-track album, 16 songs if you don't count the intro, where it's just talking, and sounds happier than anything you hear. Even the most commercially intended song like Loud Pipes and Drop It Like It's Hot don't sound as happy. The closest you get to is maybe the horns on Young Players. So that already lets you know that it's not meant to be integrated with the rest of the album. It is the intro to set it off. So having that said, again, shout out to the homie CJ, because online, if you follow social media, he does this brilliant thing where he subtracts songs from albums to make them the true classic that they could be. And if left up to me, there's so many songs that I would take off to condense this and truncate this into more of the traditional hip-hop magic number that we see for classic albums, which is 12 to 14, and we know the sweet spot, the golden number is 10, right? Taking that into consideration when you think about tempo, content, and the duration of the album. I don't know how many different ways you could assemble this where those differing points would land where they need to land. So the slower songs, for the most part, are pretty well spaced out. I mean, 2 of them are right next to each other. So those could have been spread out, where Afterworld might be a little closer to the top, and Lights Off could have been further down in the middle, maybe after Drop It Like It's Hot. The songs about women, you don't get too many, unless you consider Young Player and Drop It Like It's Hot to both be about women. Then that's another example of 2 songs being back to back that could have been spread out more. So there's some work that could have been done with the sequencing, and I do think You Want War is an interesting way to end the album when it comes right after a song like It's Up to Me, which is clearly the most heartfelt song on the album and what rappers usually go to end the album with, especially after 13 or 14 other tracks about blam blam shooting you up. But that is cohesion in a nutshell. There's a moment where What You Want ends, and then you hear the television start off the song Keisha, and it blends seamlessly one into the other. That ends and it goes right into that. Other than that, there's not a lot of intentional bleeding one song into another. It's just this goes next, and a lot of the songs run long. like that, what I mentioned with Respect Us, where Manny Fresh just wants to showcase his beats. So there's a lot of work and a lot of changes that could have been made to help the album feel a lot more cohesive. All those things are something for you to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 3, the intentional mood and tone of the album. Okay, I mentioned that this is not Wayne's Cash Money introduction by far. By now, people know Wayne since 1994 if they've been following the New Orleans rap scene and Cash Money Records, even before the huge Universal deal. Now, what it is a shift in how you may perceive him. He's no longer just this baby brother or little kid rapper who can't curse on his records. He is a grown man with a daughter. Or this is the time right after all of the marking points in Wayne's life that have now become a part of his mythos, right? So this is 16 years old when he shot the cover. This is after him shooting himself in the chest and having his daughter, Reginae. And he is 17 years old. I know that because we're the same age. We were born in the same year and we're the same size. So this album dropped right after both of us turning 17 years old. And so he's identifying as a grown man. He's acknowledging that he's still seen as a kid and that he's still a minor technically. So he'll make a lot of references to being itty bitty or a little pipsqueak or something, but being a threat and being wise beyond his years because he's street smart. And so if nothing else, that seems to be the major theme of it. It's not this big, I'm here now. He's not doing that like what he's done on other albums where he's making some grand announcement. It's not, this is the Carter or I'm the best rapper alive. It's just like, let me tell you about the block. Y'all know me. Let me tell you some more about me. That's the sentiment here. This is Wayne's dedication to his hood. You might hear Juvenile say, my little brother Weezy, and he says, my big brother Juve, but he's treated as an equal on almost every track except for Young Player, where Manny Fresh is playing some kind of character role with a pimp voice or old man, uncle, grandpa-ish. Talk about, don't make me get out this wheelchair, some kind of pimp talk thing. But there's not a lot of that on this album. It's like, hey, we all get down. That seems to be the overall tone that's being set on this album. It's not particularly dark nor light. It's a mix of both because that's just what you're getting at the Cash Money camp in the late 90s. A lot of this music was seen as being glitzy because these are the bling bling guys, right? But what they're talking about is certainly gritty. They weren't steeped in this gothic kind of thing like 3-6 was. They're now making these haunting kind of dark looming beats. They're making these chimey, get you up out your seat, bounce, maybe dance with the pistol in your hand music. But all these things are something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 4, the song distinction versus the repetition of words and sounds. Okay, I kind of started off on this tangent in dimension 1. There's hella redundancy when you're thinking about the Manny Fresh production here, just because, again, there's this formulaic system of churning out hits. It was working, and I think the Cash Money ethic at that time was give the people what they come to know us for, give them what they want from us. There's a fair amount of beats on there that sound like one track could have easily been the other if you just swap the lyrics and slap them on another track on here. With the exception of those moments of experimentation that I pointed out with Manny Fresh, that is what you're getting. And even, like I mentioned, in those, you're still getting those similar sounds. I usually say, oh, you got to be a music nerd or a hip hop nerd to really focus in on that. I think even the casual listener after a while will be like, oh, this sounds like that. He's using that same laser and that pew, that intro. It sounds the same. So that can be an Achilles heel if you're thinking about an album this long. I will repeat, I do think the length of the album is why you start to notice it. It might be a little bit more inconspicuous if it was a shorter album. Now, word-wise, this is why this album is in the conversation, because at 17 or 16, when he recorded this, depending on what your understanding of how the industry works is, Wayne was more skilled lyrically than all the other members of Cash Money Records. And I don't think that's up for debate. I know Juvenile was the star, and I know BG had the slick talk and he had the popularity. But if you listen to the cleverness of the lines that Wayne is dropping as a teenager, you can tell that he was either on the same level as BG, who's only a couple years older, or about to surpass him. And so Wayne is limited only by not having the life experience here. And so the redundancy is going to come in the thematic elements. He's not talking about much. Again, Cash Money Records in general, I don't even think this is a 90s thing. I think since Cash Money Records has existed up until now, you're not expecting much to be talked about. And so within those confines, Wayne is doing more intentional branding than lazy writing. And yes, I said writing because he's still writing at this point. And in that, if we keep in mind that the theme or the mood and tone of the album is about representing his hood, then that's what you're going to get. You're going to hear him. He's naming New Orleans things. He's naming New Orleans things. He's saying 17th Ward repeatedly and Uptown. He's letting you know what section he's from. But more than anything else, he's repping his label and his crew. He's saying Beatrice, this was his world. And since Cash Money Records was its own universe, they didn't do a lot of collaborations and outside guests. They didn't do any of that, really, especially not in the year 1999. They were an insular crew. All you're hearing is CMB, CMR, HB, Hot Boys, Big Timers, Stunner. You're hearing all of that inner crew reference that all the other Cash Money Records releases were doing more than anything else. So he's going to rep his hood. He's going to rep himself. He didn't even have that many monikers and AKAs for himself back then. He's either Wayne, Lil Weezy, or Lil Rabbit at that time. He's not Birdman Jr. He's not Young Stunner. None of that stuff yet. He's Wayne, Lil Weezy, or Lil Rabbit. And so that's the extent of your repetition. Within that, within this limited scope of things to talk about, Wayne is coming up with different ways and different sound effects to articulate the same points. So yeah, all of that is something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats when you're thinking about the song distinction versus the repetition on the beats and on the lyrics. All right, that takes us to, speaking of which, dimension 5, the amount of content versus the amount of songs. And yeah, I just pointed out, there's not a lot of that. And that's not the expectation, which doesn't give it a curve, right? We're still rating this as we would rate any other classic album. Just because it wasn't what was expected from Cash Money Records in 1999 for the 99 and the 2000 doesn't mean that we don't hold it to the same standard that we hold all rap albums. Same way with just because Wayne was a teenager, we're not dumbing down the expectation. Wayne is able on 17 tracks, on 16 songs, to give you some content. F the World and Up to Me are definite moments where he wants to be contemplative and talk about his life and the woes and the emotionality of what's going on at that time. And I think it's some heavy subject matter for rap in general. And some of the first times I've heard some of these things addressed on rap albums. And then he's got songs about women. They're not the most imaginative, but if you count Keisha, Young Player, and Drop It Like It's Hot, he's got his songs where he's talking about sexcapades. And that's really about it. There's just different ways of him bragging and talking about the streets. The title track, The Block Is Hot, is also content because he is talking about what goes on in his neighborhood. That's one song where the focal point is not him. On Not Like Me, you see Manny Fresh tries to take it somewhere where it's almost like someone you know switching up on you, betrayal, but it's not what Wayne does in his verses, and so it doesn't make it a full song about anything besides braggadocio. There's different ways he brags. Come On and What You Want are more aggressive, taunting songs, where the other songs are more flossy. So it's up to you to determine if that is enough content or if that makes it limited. How does that affect the album on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats? That takes us to dimension 6. Okay, I've already mentioned this is a Cash Money Records project. All you're going to hear on here are other Cash Money Records artists who were popping at the time. And I say that like there's a whole selection to pick from. It's the Hot Boys and the Big Timers, right? So you're going to get Turk on 2 tracks here. You're going to get BG and Juvenile all over this album, and Manny Fresh. And I think Baby or Birdman, I refuse to call him Baby. I feel like Birdman is on 1.5 tracks. He's not really in rap mode yet. They had just popped out as the Big Timers. And so Manny Fresh all over this, even when he's not rapping, he's talking, he's doing intros, he's playing that character, as I mentioned. And, you know, he's got one verse that's better than the other. I'll say that. His verse on Loud Pipes, he's trying to go somewhere with it. The way he's talking about how much money he has to the point of just reckless expenses and uses, right? I'd use Cristal to lubricate the rubber. There's a cleverness there, but man, that man gives a damn about flow on there. Whereas Flow on the song Not Like Me, he's doing something that could be likened to like an E40, where he's just on the beat enough for it to be a really interesting flow pattern that he's using, and his lines have more clarity and focus and a lot more cleverness. But you're not, again, expecting much from Manny Fresh. You're not expecting the producer of the album to have the verse of the year. Juvie comes on and adds the weightiness that's needed to balance this album from not feeling like a kid album. From anybody who would have written off Wayne as still a kid rapper at this point, having Juvie on there anchors the album. As soon as he comes in with his gravelly voice and adds these hooks, it's validation in some way, because there's that, oh, this is a G on here, not a baby G, right? More so than, I don't think anyone was looking at Manny Fresh for the G-ism. And you got Birdman there, but you're looking at Birdman for the G, not for the rap. And so Juvenile is the perfect middle section of that. And Enemy Turf, it's a good contrast, him and Wayne's voices. And then BG similarly, BG being like, again, the senior to Wayne's junior, or the college student to Wayne's senior at this point, if we're talking 17. There you go. It's just a little bit more weight that's tipped in his favor of take this seriously. Not the greatest contrast. BG and Wayne, their voices are not that different. BG is distinct. He's got that slur. He's got that slow gravelly. But it's not this stark contrast like what you get from Juvenile. You get Papa Rule doing the reggae hook on Not Like Me, or their version of a reggae hook, and it switches things up. It switches the feel up on the album. It gives you some variety because it's a different sound and a different type of voice than what you've heard. And that's it. There's no singers. His back and forth game with Turk on You Want War, at that particular time, I feel like a lot of people were expecting those two members of the Hot Boys to do an album together. I guess maybe they didn't touch that because of all the things that happened to Turk after the 90s, immediately after the 90s, and the direction his career took, or because, hey, we already did the Bee Gees album. I'm a soloist, we all soloists. Let's do our own thing. Turk is up next for his solo. Let him shine, and then maybe we can think about that. But we saw how that went. And so they're on here in different iterations. You got some songs with the Big Timers and BG, some songs with the Big Timers, BG and Juvie, some songs with just BG and Juvie doing the hook, some songs with just Juvenile doing the hook, just like You Want War is Turk, and then Keisha's the Hot Boys track. All right, so it's up to y'all to determine on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats if those features helped the album or hurt the album. Could this album have benefited from some outside features? Knowing what Wayne became later, was he held back by this cash money ethic of keeping everything in-house? Similar to Wu-Tang, when we were talking about Method Man breaking the rules and starting to collaborate with outsiders from Wu-Tang Clan. Should Wayne have done that sooner? Takes us to Dimension 7, the question of, do the weakest songs, or does the weakest song on the album bring it down or take away? Subjective, it is up to you. If you were fully engulfed and bought into the cash money ethos at the time, then They could do no wrong. The party tracks did what they needed to do. The street tracks did what they needed to do. The experimental tracks did what they needed to do. But if you don't like any one of those three, that could mess things up for you. If you're not a fan of those commercial sounding party tracks like Loud Pipes, Drop It Like It's Hot, Young Player, then it's gonna feel like, skip, let me just hear the street stuff. If you feel like the street stuff is too repetitive and it's Wayne, what does he know about it? He's not Juvenile, he's not BG, then you want to jump to the other stuff. And then if the experimental stuff like the salsa beat on Respect Us is just too out there, you want wars, it's too much, then you're not gonna feel any of it. Now, I usually only do this when I have guests and I'm feeling the spirit, but shoot, since I'm taking advantage of not having a birthday month episode or a birthday episode, I'm just gonna chime in with my little 2 cents here. I would chop at least 4 or 5 songs off of this album to bring it down to that classic status. Loud Pipes is expendable. Keisha has to go. Keisha is a song that in this climate, in this day and age, you probably want buried. You probably want to forget that you made that song. It is the most, I can't say the words, so a grape culture type song ever. And I know the whole premise of it is that, oh, there's women out there that's willing to do the whole crew in one night, but it's like, really? I read somewhere that said this is the kind of song that a 16-year-old boy would write. It reminds me of when we were reviewing the Souls of Mischief album and we got to that song, A Name I Call Myself, where it sounds like, yeah, this is horny teen boy type of writing, limited imagination. Yeah, we doing her in the alley with the KY jelly. Listen, I don't want to be around any mentality that thumbs up a song like Keisha. Like, that's how far removed we should be from that kind of content. It just sounds, if that song is ever used in the court of law, even though it's talking about consensual adult activity, it doesn't sound consensual. You understand? It just, yeah. So Keisha can go. Young Player has to go. That's another song where it was totally cringeworthy. At the end of the last verse on that song, Wayne says something about grape your lover, and it's like, come on, bruh. And it's not a memorable beat. Remember Me Can Go, that beat is just lacking, and the most important thing that's talked about is that he took one to the chest, but if he would have put that hook on another song, we're good to go. So that's 4 off the top. Brings it to a 12-song album, easily condense it. Drop It Like It's Hot could be shortened. You could take Wayne's second verse out because he deviates from the topic to talk about gunplay. So there's a lot of slimming down that could be done. Those are just my hot takes. I honestly think if the album was shorter, it would be less debatable as a classic. I digress. I'd love to hear what y'all think the weakest songs are, and if you feel like they take away from the album in any shape, form, or fashion. Takes us to the next dimension. Dimension 8, Mass Appeal. All right, Cash Money was a juggernaut in the year 1999. They were riding off a wave of fame and success that made anything that they were going to churn out platinum primed. This album winds up going platinum in 2 months. By the end of this year that it dropped, it was platinum. And you can argue that a lot of this is the residual popularity and fame that Wayne spiked for himself by adding that outro refrain on Cash Money Records' biggest hit to this day, which has become, if you let some people tell it, a new Negro spiritual, back that ass up, back that thing up, where he does the whole drop it like it's hot thing. And so people had more curiosity than they had previously about this Wayne character. I also think videos helped, and being able to see these guys. The Hot Boys We On Fire video where they're literally holding fire and running around in white t-shirts looking like the hood Power Rangers, that piqued interest. Who's this young boy talking the same stuff that all these grown men are talking? So people that weren't from the South, weren't from New Orleans, now had more of a visual radar of this Lil Wayne person. The stage is set, it's prime for Wayne to come out and properly introduce himself, and he does just that. Surprisingly, there's only 2 official singles released from this album. It is The Block is Hot, which is the street single. We're still in the 90s, so street singles still matter. And then Respect Us, which is the follow-up. And I don't think they ever got a chance to release what you could imagine would be the third one of the flashy songs or songs about women. More than likely Drop It Like It's Hot, because I've heard Manny Fresh talk about basing future singles off of whatever hook lines were in current singles, right? So Hot Girl off of the Hot Boys album, Turk says, I need a project chick. And that prompted them to make the song Project Chick. And so you got to believe that Drop It Like It's Hot was supposed to be the third single. Any of my New Orleans viewers in the comments can let me know if that got local radio play as a single, because sometimes that happens in your own market, in your own region and hometown. You'll get album cuts played like they're singles. Wayne defies odds and exceeds expectations on this album without giving you a bunch of dance music. Standalone, if this wasn't Cash Money's heyday and they were just unbeatable, would this be enough to push the needle? I'm not sure. And I'm still not sure why it didn't make it to having 3 singles. But when I think about BG's solo release, he also didn't have like radio ready records like that until Bling Bling dropped, which had the whole crew on it. And so when I think of a song like Drop It Like It's Hot, it would have been a good look to come out because it features BG on it and it's about women, and BG didn't have that definitive song rapping about women like Juvie had. Videos matter in this era. If you're to believe that seeing Wayne pop up in videos helped people pay more attention to him, then by the time he's releasing his own videos, that certainly helps. I don't know if the imagery in Respect Us is as memorable as the imagery in The Block is Hot. The Block is Hot, you're seeing his hood. You're seeing him rap in the rain. You're seeing all this imagery, this nighttime cinematic kind of feel, and you're seeing his characterizations. You're getting to learn what Wayne's personality is like, and you're getting to see him stand alone. It's Cash Money, but it's Wayne showing you Wayne. So all these things are something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats when you're thinking about the mass appeal of this album. That takes us to Dimension 9, my favorite dimension, the 3 I's: impact, innovation, influence. All right. The impact mainly is that Wayne has established himself as a soloist to be reckoned with and not seen as a kid rapper. To Northern folk, my fellow New Yorkers, we only know Wayne as the young Hot Boy member, and quickly in the same year learn him as the soloist. So we didn't grow up thinking of, oh, Lil Wayne, this kid. And so most of the country doesn't see Wayne, and he doesn't have to go through that Bow Wow or crisscross effect of, oh, we're supposed to take you serious now. We don't have to go through that. It helps that Wayne was always kind of talking this street stuff, even as a little boy. But now it's like, okay, you're established. That doesn't help him for the next 2 albums, but by the time he drops The Carter, it's like, Wayne, we're familiar with you. We know you do this. We know you've been doing this for a minute. Now you're proving it. Now, innovation, I do think Wayne is bringing a little bit of outside influence into the New Orleans rap scene, because at that point, all of the rappers that you're hearing from Louisiana, Baton Rouge rappers, New Orleans rappers, they are very rooted in their territory, and they're very about planting the flag for their section of the earth. The most deviation you're going to hear them sound is maybe towards another southern landscape. Wayne, being someone who is young enough to be tuned into and tapped into rappers like Jay-Z, you hear elements of that. You hear him bringing in little things. It reminds me of T.I. when T.I. first came out. He's giving you a different slant on what a southern rapper could do, because there's more influences coming from different spaces. I'm ambidextrous, and it's just in a glimmer. I don't think the casual listener will pick up on it. You see that there's more nuance to what Wayne is doing. Even his accent is not as slurry or heavy, and maybe because he's a kid, as Juvie or BG. there's no denying where they're from, and they're very happy staying right there and only impressing that area. You can tell even from this debut, when it came to rap itself, Wayne wanted to impress more than just his hood. As much as this album was about his block, he wants you to feel his rap skills for what they are. I don't know how much innovation that is, but you start seeing the first twinklings of Wayne being able to do more. And influence-wise, I don't know how many people would give this album credit. All the Wayne fans, all the Wayne proteges, if they go back this far. Most people's introduction to Wayne either starts with his mixtape era or his Carter era, and that's unfortunate because Wayne came out the gate with these skills. The cleverness is inherent and apparent. We'll take a closer look at the cleverness of his ability. For me, I was certainly influenced. Shout out to one of my best friends in high school, Randall. He had this album. We were both big Tupac fans. And I'm like, bro, why are you having this? He had it on CD. He's like, just listen to it. He let me hold it for a week. I played it. And I remember being instantly disgusted by the Keisha song. Yeah, even as a horny teen, I was like, nah, this ain't it. But instantly tuned in and tapped in to the fact that Wayne could rap. I'm like, oh, he actually has some skills and he's talking about something. So it proved to me as a New York kid that Southern rappers could tap dance over beats when they wanted to. Where Outkast had this lyricism and this soulfulness, Wayne had this, I can rap circles around any beat. But I don't know how much that influenced anybody else, and all of these things are something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats when you're thinking about the impact, innovation, and influence of this particular album. Which takes us to the final dimension, Dimension 10, the overall timelessness and uniqueness of this album. Because of that Manny Fresh, Cash Money, bulldoze style that they were just going to be a hit factory and throwing it out, it is absolutely guilty of having dated sounds and a dated feel for a lot of the tracks. And you'd have to be someone that already bought into this album and is just impressed by what Wayne is able to do on it to look past that. I think if you try to introduce this to people now, there's a lot of songs that would get skipped. I think the countryness of it might be off-putting when people come to know Wayne as this more enunciated rapper with distinct diction now. And of course, it suffers on the uniqueness side because if you take Wayne off of it, then it sounds like any other Cash Money Records project. You put any of the other rappers, this could have easily been Turk's debut, right? What makes this album Lil Wayne's album is because Lil Wayne's on it, not because of the production. And so, yeah, on the uniqueness and the overall timelessness, you get a lot of demerits. And with that in mind, that is something for you to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats, how much that takes away from the album, makes or breaks it as a classic. And with that, that concludes the Category 1 review and analysis of the album, which is now 25 years old as of this month. The Block is Hot by Lil Wayne, his major debut as a soloist and the start of who a lot of people consider to be the GOAT rapper and the most influential, Tunechi, Young Tunechi. So I can't wait to hear the feedback for this episode. And until next time, join me for Category 2, where we go over the rap performance on this album. Y'all know what it is. F a Rap Critic. They talk about it while I live it. Word to meth.